object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. Andy Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Researchers on a Mission, ROAM Radio, also known as Dr. J Radio. And I mean researchers today at the truest heart. And we are researchers on a mission for the truth. The reason why I say the researchers to the truest meaning of the word is because I have a special guest co-host today, a superstar co-host for that matter. As a matter of fact, you've all heard him on the show several times as well as other shows, and that is Grant Cameron. Mr. Cameron, welcome to the show.
Dr. J, thank you. You're so kind.
Oh, I knew it was an honor when you emailed me, knowing that we were going to speak to Betty Andreasson and Bob Luca, and I thought it'd be a brilliant idea to have you call in. And then I asked them, and they said it was okay. And then I decided to have you full co-host the show with me, and I figured it'd be really willing because not only do you use a quote when you send out, you actually have some remarkable questions because you've been studying the case for so long. But before we introduce them formally, I was hoping we could briefly touch on some really important news, which I'm sure everybody out there's probably heard at this point because mainstream media has actually picked up on this. And I do got to make a major announcement after we do that too. But first, let's talk about the tweet by John Podesta. His biggest regret of 2014 is not securing the UFO files and then hashtag disclosure, hashtag the real truth is still out there. What do you think that means for disclosure? I think it's one of the greatest things we could have had.
My interpretation of what happened was John Podesta went back to the White House in December of 2013. He left last Friday. On the Thursday, he tweeted. And basically what he had said earlier to the Washington Post was that when the Obama files go to the library, people are going to be asking for correspondence between him and Obama. What the tweet means to me is he's saying in 2014, which is when he went back to the White House, my greatest regret was that I was unable to secure the UFO files. What that means to me is that he asked Obama, and he wanted it released, and Obama said no. And that agrees with a statement that President Obama made in Roswell, New Mexico in March of 2012 when he talked about the Roswell crash, where he said, we will keep our secrets here. So what this means to me is Podesta is saying, I just want to let you know, I asked Obama about the files. He said no, I tried, and I'm leaving the White House. And he's just sort of covering his backside that he tried to get the files out, and the message is it's not coming out from the government. And that's sort of a good segue to your guest, because what I say now, I don't do much for the government. I chased Podesta and all these people for years. What I say now is that if you want to know the UFO truth, what's really going on, you have to talk to experiencers. You have to talk to people who've been on the ship, who have talked to the beings involved, and you've got two of them on your show tonight. If you want to know the truth, you're not going to, at this point, still get it from the government. You're going to get it from people who have interacted, like your guest tonight, who are willing to talk about what they were told. This is where the truth is, I think, with your guest tonight.
Thank you for saying that. And I always introduce anybody that has to do with alien abduction as this being my favorite topic because exactly what you said. If you want to figure it out, you're not going to get it by watching how the UFOs fly or anything like that. Okay, trace evidence, so what? Okay, they're here. But you're not going to know what they look like, act like, their intentions are, what the interactions are, unless you speak to the source being people who have had interactions. And you're absolutely right. Let me just go back and make that big announcement, and that is that Governor Michael Dukakis, former White House a presidential candidate from 1992 who lost to George H.W. Bush, just confirmed today that he will be joining us right here on Dark Matter Radio. And I just wanted to throw that out there because I'm hoping we can turn him with all this evidence that's out there, specifically with what happened at the citizen hearing. But let's go back to what I think is by far the most important topic, and that is the alien abduction. And with that being said, let's introduce our two very important guests, Betty Andreasson Luca and her husband Bob Luca, both experiencers who have had an amazing story to tell. Betty and Bob, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Dr. John.
Thank you.
It's an honor, and
We're very thrilled to be here.
Oh, we are thrilled. Believe me, me and Grant are extremely thrilled, and the listeners are going to be thrilled when we get done with the show, as I'm sure they already are, just hearing your name. And this case has been important for decades, and obviously some of the most important researchers were involved, from Dr. Jalen Hynek to Raymond Fowler, who wrote several of your books. And of course, when we get to it later, that you guys have a new book. But let's pretend everybody out there doesn't necessarily know what happened, and let's go back to when everything started. Who would like to pick up on the date and exactly when you were taken or when you realized you were taken, and then go back to that?
Well, I had a much earlier experience than the Andreasson Fear book is out now, and that's the 1967 adult experience I had. But I had 3 other experiences while I was much younger. At 7 years old, I lived in Leominster, Massachusetts, and I was out in the yard waiting for a friend to come over and play dolls with me. And as I was sitting in a little hut that my brother had made, I had crackers, and I was eating crackers, and all of a sudden something came into the little hut, and it was buzzing around my head. I thought it was a bumblebee, but all of a sudden it turned to light. It was a ball of light, struck me in the forehead, right between the eyes, and a voice started to speak. It seemed like many voices within one, and it said, "The wee little one is coming along fine." So they were checking me.
Betty, can I ask you if you could speak a little closer to your mic for the listeners? Because here I'm getting some feedback from them that we're not.
Is this better?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Can you describe the beings that came in, or were they what you would normally say on? What are they? Typical grays, or were they the different kinds of beings? Because I know in your book you have had several.
Yes, there have been several different beings that I've had encounters with. The 1967 encounter, which is all written by Raymond Fowler in the Andreasson Affair book, is out now, and a lot of the details are given within it. And the beings were dressed in a blue suit. They had a very large head, gray skin with big, dark, black, scary eyes. They had like a belt on and a sash across their chest, and there was like a bird emblem on their shoulder. And they came into my home in 1967 right through the wooden door, and I was amazed. However, even though I was sort of caught off guard, wondering what is this and everything, I felt a peace and a love come over me, because scripture came into my mind to entertain the strangers, for it may be angels unaware. And, who are we to know or tell what angels look like? So I felt that that's what it was. And at that particular time, they had spoken to me through my mind, and I thought they wanted something to eat, so I went to the refrigerator, got some meat, and I started to cook it on the stove, and little smoke rose, and the being who was the leader, he jumped back, and he spoke to my mind again. He said, no, not that. We don't want that to eat. We're looking for knowledge tried by fire. And at that point, the only thing I could think of was perhaps the Bible. It has been around for a long, long time. So at that point, we went into the living room, and I reached down for the Bible to pass to him, and I could see that my mother and my children were sitting on the couch, and they were in a state of suspended animation, and that kind of had me a little shook to see that. And I passed the book, the Bible, to the leader, who said his name was Quasgar. And at that point, he reached out his hand to hold on to the book. I could see he had 3 fingers on his hand. And he waved his other hand over it, and 3 other thin books were made instantly I don't know how he did it, but he waved his hand over it, and there were books there. He passed it to the three that were standing beside him, and they immediately held them in their hands, and the pages went by one after another very quickly, and it seemed like they were all light, and as if their eyes were consuming whatever was there. I didn't see any print or writing on there, but it seemed as if they were receiving something from it. And then at that time, I was worried about my family there, and I think the leader, who said his name was Krasgar, took my daughter Becky out of that suspended animation briefly so that I would see that they were all right. So she was standing up there and was watching, but she couldn't move. She just was standing watching, and he passed me a thin blue book, and he said, this I could hold on to for 10 days. And look through it. It was sort of like an initiation of some sort, and that I was to try to grasp as much as I possibly could from the pictures and the writings, strange writings within it. And there were days that I would sit down and try and look through it. When the children were at school, usually, I would look through it while I was all alone and try to understand what it was. However, as far as just a person looking at it, it was very difficult to understand. The pictures were more interesting to me. And what happened was, I think, though, our minds are able to understand some things more than what we are taught. So I was looking through that thin blue book, and I had it for about 9 days. What happened was my daughter Becky, about 3 or 4 days later, came to me and she said, Mommy, I've been having this awful dream of these strange people in our house and everything. And I was worried, she must have remembered because she had come out of the state of suspended animation briefly. And so I told her, shh, don't make noise or say much because I don't want the other kids being afraid. And I said, but I'll show you what I was given. So I took her into my bedroom, and I had the book up in the closet on a shelf, and I pulled it out, and I let her see it. I held it out. She put her hand on it, and when she did, she lifted her hand, and there were all sparkles all over her hand. And ever since that time, she has been able to write strange language.
As it rubbed off on her. Gran has a question. Go ahead, Grant.
Sure. Yeah.
Your first experience, when you go back to your first experience, it was what year was it?
That was when I was 7 years old, 1944.
So this is almost 70 years you've been interacting with these beings.
Yes, quite a while.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've had several different encounters.
Now, when you're after that point that you said your daughter was seeing the strange writing, now I think that makes total sense that if you see images versus writing, then you pick up on it. And the reason is we think linearly. I was taking this interesting program, the same thing as Edgar Mitchell, which essentially teaches you to unlock or keep your conscious mind linking to your subconscious mind. And essentially, as children, when we're born, until age 5, the learning curve is skyrockets, but it starts going down for the rest of our lives after age 5. Why? Because we go to school and we're taught linear thinking. So that makes total sense of what happened with your daughter and what you were able to pick up from those images. Can you describe what some of this strange writing looked like?
Well, it looked as if some of the pictures looked a little bit like the craft, different things in the craft, but there was so much. It was a thin book, but it seemed to contain an awful lot of information. And I think the mind, like you say, not being taught in school at that time, the thing is your mind does pick up more than what you would if you had been taught it.
Now, Bob, at this point, have you had experiences at this point, or was it only after you had married Betty down the line?
No, my first experience also was in 1944, long before I met Betty. I met Betty in 1977, and I also had a adult encounter in 1967 during the summer, where I was taken aboard. I was given a physical examination, I guess you would call it, and my body was scanned. I was taken right out of my car on the day that I was on the way to the beach. And what happened was, when I got to the beach, which normally would be about a 30-minute ride, approximately 2.5 to 3 hours had passed, and for years I never knew where that portion of my life had gone. And I told my parents and my best friend what I had sighted. What happened at that time, I was, as I said, on my way to the beach, and I came by a quarry, and there was a railroad spur going into that quarry. There were 5 men working on that railroad spur, only they weren't working, they were looking up in the sky. So I looked up to see what the attraction was, and there were 2 huge cigar-shaped objects that looked like polished chrome glinting in the sun. It was a cloudless day with a bright sun. Now, I'd always been interested in technologies of all kinds, and immediately I noticed these things had no wings, no tail section. It was just like a flying fuselage with no windows. There was no noise, no exhaust or trail, and they were just floating from where I was toward New Haven, Connecticut. As I watched, 2 smaller objects dropped out of these large ones, one out of the center of each one. One went toward New Haven, one went in the exact opposite direction. So I watched till they were out of sight, thinking, wow, this is something really unreal. When they were out of sight, I restarted my trip to the beach. I got down the road several miles, and at that time, this was a very rural area. There were no houses in the area. I saw one of the small objects coming back, and it was above and to the left of me. It stopped several feet off the ground, and this is all conscious memory. And I turned, I'm looking at this thing, and it was kind of wobbling, almost like a leaf floating down to the ground. And the next thing I knew, there was a brilliant flash of red light that I could only describe as a brilliant, like a ruby red laser, a very brilliant, dense light. And somehow, after that light flashed, I was inside the craft. I was asked to remove my clothing. I was put on a table that I can only liken to maybe plexiglass. And at this time, I'm not going to lie to you, I was frightened. I mean, I want to get out of there. They told me they were not going to hurt me. And I'm thinking, yeah, you're not going to hurt me, but I'm stuck. This table had no restraints, no straps, but I was stuck on it, almost like somebody put super glue all along the back side of me. And I could move my eyes, and I had a little bit of movement in my head. They examined me, they took samples of skin and nails, and they moved my joints and various things. I was scanned with something similar to an X-ray machine that scanned me from head to foot. And when they were done, I was put back in my vehicle, and as I said, I arrived at the beach 2.5, 3 hours later than I should have. Well, that stuck with me for a long time, and it wasn't until I met Betty in Florida, which is a whole another trip that was highly unusual, that she introduced me to some of the MUFON investigators. And that's when I underwent some hypnosis to find out what happened to that 2.5, 3 hours. And that's when the rest of the story came out about the examination. And I don't often mention it. They took sperm also at the same time. And,
well, that's not uncommon. As a matter of fact, when Captain Solace finally broke his truth, he was very... that's what he recalled. He hasn't gone through regression, but he recalled. I think he has gone through regression at this point now. But he actually recalled them using a giant needle, showing it to him first, and then taking it. But before we go on further, Grant has another amazing question. And I was hoping I could ask Betty and Bob one more time when you answer, if you could speak a little bit higher. I'm getting a little more feedback from the listeners that they can't quite hear you as well. And Grant, if you could do us a favor and watch for the background noises. But go ahead, Grant.
Okay. Question, Bob, you mentioned that you basically had sort of the same sightings starting about the same time. I've heard you tell the story. Can you sort of get into the story about how you may have been put together with Betty in terms of the trip to Florida, and which leads to the question, do you believe, the two of you, do you believe that you have some sort of mission that you were put together and you have some sort of mission to achieve here on Earth?
Well, I know our meeting was highly unusual. It actually started in 1944 when a craft came in. I was at my grandmother's house. I lived there then with my mom because my dad was overseas during the war. An object approached me, and I remember even as a child seeing this bright light in the sky. It came toward my swing set, and it stopped above and to the left-hand side of me. It emitted a very thin white beam of light, like about the size of a lead in a pencil. And when that struck me in the forehead between the eyes, I was paralyzed. I could not move off of those swings. So at the time, they had the craft tipped slightly. It was a typical saucer shape, but it had a glass, I think it was glass or something similar, dome on top. And I could see these two little gray guys in there. And even as a kid, I knew that this was not normal. But they told me that they were preparing something that would be good for mankind in the future. And they also said that people like me and many others that they had contacted would meet in the future, and they would not be frightened of what they had seen. Okay, now we'll ramp it up to 1977. I'm single. I'm working as a service manager in a new car dealership. I had an excellent job. I got a new car every 3 months, a new demo. I had a good salary, company benefits, gas expense. And a friend of mine said, he said, I'm interested in maybe looking for work somewhere else in the country. And I was at work constantly. Well, I decided to take this trip with him, and I went into my boss, and I said, Bob, I want a month off. And he said he could not give me a month off. Well, I thought about it over the weekend. I went back in on Monday. I said, Bob, you can fire me, I can quit, or you can give me the month off, which is highly unusual because I put my job at total risk there. Well, he gave me the time off, and my friend Eddie and I went around the country. We're in California, Texas, Washington State. We're coming back across the northern tier of the U.S., and at a rest area, we just decided to go to Florida. Now, this is several thousand miles out of our way. We get to Florida. We go to, Eddie had a sister-in-law down there. We went to her house and parked our vehicle in her yard. And one night when we were having supper, she mentioned that she worked with someone that had this UFO experience. And I said, wow, I'd love to talk to this person because I have kept myself pretty quiet for like 10 years at that time. And, in 1967, I wasn't about to go telling a lot of people what I saw. I didn't want to end up in an asylum, to be honest with you. So she told me where Betty was working. I went down to visit her, and she wouldn't talk to me because Ray Fowler had told her to beware of reporters. So I talked to her, turned on a little bit of charm, and apparently it worked because she agreed to have lunch with me the next day. And I have been buying her lunch ever since that day. So, this is not an accident. I wouldn't risk my job like that normally. I was a hard worker. I was making good money. I was single. I had all kinds of benefits, and yet I put my job at risk to take that trip and ended up meeting Betty at that time. And if I look back now and remember what the beings told me in 1944, then it makes sense. And possibly why we're together. Betty and I we're total opposites. She spent a lot of time reading the Bible when she was younger. I spent a lot of time racing cars and raising hell. But it's helped us because a lot of stuff that the government started on us when the first book came out, I was wise to. And, for instance, one of the things they did, they followed us with a number of cars. We were put under surveillance. Well, because I had built race cars and raced on the street, because there were no racetracks where I lived, several times I was able to actually get behind the cars that were following us. I got the license plate numbers, gave them to Police Lieutenant Larry Fawcett, and they came back as unissued. So, right there, your average Joe isn't driving a car with unissued plates.
Yes.
They also started surveillance with the helicopters. They tapped our phone. The FBI kept an eye on us, and they had to show their hand one time. They lost track of us. Betty and I got up about 3 o'clock on a cold morning. We were living in Connecticut, and we hooked up my camp trailer and went to Florida. Well, that was on a Saturday or early Sunday morning, and then I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday, 2 men with FBI photo identification showed up at my job, and they wanted to know where we were. And this has been documented by, I believe it was Connecticut Magazine did an article on us sometime later, and they interviewed my coworkers and my supervisor and found out, yes, just as mentioned, the FBI did show up at my job. So when we got back from Florida, my employer told me the FBI was looking for me. So Betty and I went to the federal building in New Haven. We went to the FBI office and said, well, what do you want? And they said that in our case, they could not confirm nor deny that anyone was at my job. Well, that's standard. So while we were there, I asked them, well, why are you guys tapping our telephone? And the answer we got, and this agent didn't know us, supposedly, when we walked in off the street. He said, in your case, it's not us, it's Air Force intelligence. So sometime later, I had an opportunity to talk to someone in Air Force intelligence, and I was told that they need a court order, and it wasn't them, it was the FBI. But remembering the case with Betty and Barney Hill, if I remember correctly, her phone was tapped, and they did find out that her calls were being monitored by Pease Air Force Base. So at this time, I tend to lean more toward it being Air Force intelligence than the FBI. But the FBI definitely was involved in our surveillance. And some of the people they had, I don't think we were that high of importance to them, because some of the people honestly weren't very good at it. We caught them quite often. And some of them were actually embarrassed when we turned the car around, came face to face with them, and things of that nature. So, and as I said, the cars had unissued plates. So that's a pretty good clue as to who it was.
I want to make a couple of remarks before I turn it over to Betty. First of all, I'm glad this is totally synchronicity that everything worked out with Grant being on here, because he's studying consciousness and the importance of it, as I've been taking it to see the importance of it really, specifically in the last few years, more so than in my entire life. And I've been diving into the subconscious and the programming that you can have done. And I think what Grant asked was brilliant, because I was thinking the exact same thing. I believe that the fact that you two met at such something that is not more so of a coincidence, where you basically said you did some things opposite of what you normally would do, sounds to me like they programmed you to do so. And I think the reason why you two are being monitored more so than other contactees is for the reason that it's highly unusual, at least from all the research I've done, to find two people who have been independently taken and then brought together. And I think because you each have a case, which obviously when you mentioned, Betty, when you talked about your daughter having those, with that incident with the strangers coming in a room, again, everybody that studies abductions in general can tell you that they go in family lines. Before I actually turn it to Betty, Grant does have another question, and I want to turn it over to him because, of course, I know he's got some remarkable things to say, and that's exactly why I brought him on. Go ahead, Grant.
Well, it's just a short question related to that. Maybe Betty or Bob can confirm this. Wasn't Raymond Fowler an abductee as well?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you have another. I mean, the two of you, and then suddenly the guy who's doing the case is an abductee. It's almost like maybe you can give your opinion, Betty. To me, it's almost they're just look at a book and they're just sort of turning pages, and everybody's just sort of watching what they're doing. That there's a sort of a master plan in action, and they have all sorts of people working different roles and different things.
Exactly.
There's also, to add to that, my mother had memories of the inside of a craft, but she would never go for hypnosis to follow up on it because she was fearful. And I believe Betty's mother had something similar happen to her, which she can tell you.
She was very fearful of it. She thought the researchers wanted to question her on it. She said, no, don't have them come to the house. I don't want anything like that happening. She was really fearful of the UFO phenomena.
You know, going back to what I asked earlier, Betty, can you give what essentially, since Bob had done pretty much opposite of what he normally would do to the incident that he met you. And obviously, I got to say, the era that you two met, 1977, it was a very difficult era to be talking about. We're talking extremely taboo. So Raymond Fowler, I got to applaud him for telling you to stay away from reporters because they would have poo-pooed the story.
Job.
Yeah.
He did a wonderful job. I couldn't have asked for a better author than him.
And a better person in general, especially you could relate to.
Yes.
Well, can you tell us the circumstances of what led you to that, to essentially saying yes to Bob, aside from his charm? He's a charming man. But was there anything different that you would have normally not done that led to that incident or put you in that specific location where you had a chance to meet him?
What happened with me is I went down to Florida to get a job. Well, to get another house. Actually, I had my husband and I had split. He had taken off and everything, and so we had a huge house that we had built, and of course our 7 children were there, which was very difficult. And he just disappeared after he had sort of an alcohol problem, and he disappeared and had actually gone down to Florida, but I wasn't aware of it. And the thing was, the 7 children were there, and they were starting to grow up, and grandchildren were being born also. Becky had 2, but I went down to Florida to try and purchase a smaller home because we had the huge home. And this was after I found out that my ex-husband was living with another woman, so I knew that my marriage was over. And I went down to Florida at my sister's house, and she said, get a small house and come down, buy one down here where it's warm and everything. Why spend winter up north? And you know what Massachusetts can be like, as it's showing now. But I did buy a small house down there, but the papers hadn't gone through as yet. And so I thought, well, I'll get a job. And so I went to a restaurant, got a waitress job. Meanwhile, my daughter Becky was watching my children up in the at the big house. And when I was waiting for the papers to go through and sign, I met also the cook at the clock where I was working, and I told her that I had had a UFO experience. And it was at that time that Bob and his friend Eddie, Eddie was the brother-in-law of the cook, and they had stopped there to have a visit, and also were eating dinner. And that's when Catherine had mentioned to Bob and Eddie that there was a woman working at the clock that had a UFO experience, and that was when Bob realized, I have to speak to her. So I really do believe the whole thing was prearranged by a higher power.
And that makes complete sense because I think you guys, first of all, 2 things. You've given serious inspiration for others to come forward and tell their story. So that's the first thing I have to say. And clearly what you've been doing and with the inspiration, I think at some point something bigger is going to come. And that may be what we'll get into a little bit after about the one, which we'll address when we get to that in a moment. Grant has a question, but before we do, I actually have a question specifically from a listener, and I want to read it to you word for word. So if it doesn't come out right, I'm sure we'll get it. Okay, it says, Betty had witnessed symbols and hieroglyphs on a craft, which after the sightings was able to read and write in this language yourself. Does she still have this ability?
I do, but I don't press it. There is so much going on right now. Trying to write the new book has taken up a great deal of time. I'm not an author, and neither is Bob. So what we decided, we would tell our what our life has been like up until now, and I have had another experience with the one, and therefore I mentioned it to Ray Fowler. He's much older now, and I think he's settling down from writing books, but the thing was, I mentioned it to him, and he says, well, Betty, there's only about maybe 2 or 3 chapters with what happened, And so I thought, well, yeah, I don't know what else you could write about. And so I thought, but the people want to know what's going on and what happened with about the one. So I spoke with Bob, and I said, what do you think we can do so we can get that information out to the public? And we decided, well, we'll tell what our life has been like, and we'll give bits and pieces of each encounter that we have had, so people will be able to understand and see. It won't be the whole encounter of each time we've had an abduction, but at least people will understand why things happened the way they did. And so, as I said, the book that we have written now, we're going to see if it can be published, and it's called Lifting the Veil. The information about 2 or 3 chapters it would make is about the one, and a lot of it has to do with letting me know that there is something in the future that I am going to have to do. I've also had some prophetic dreams that have shown to me that there's something that I have to do for the world.
And I'm hoping we can actually...
As well as when in 1967, the one told me, I have chosen you to show the world. For a long time, I questioned myself and questioned everyone, what do you think it is? I don't know what it is I'm supposed to tell the world or show the world. And the only thing now really, like you were saying, is our experiences, so others can come forward and also tell their experiences so that it may help others understand.
And they have been coming out in massive numbers, and I'm hoping maybe a little bit after a break or so, which will be in about 20 minutes, that we could talk about those dreams. And I do want to also say that the mission, several people who are taken do have a mission, and that's the whole reason of why they're taken. And it's programmed to them to come, I think, in the post-disclosure world, or maybe to help the rest of us understand. But with that being said, Grant's had a question for some time, and I know we had a listener question first. I'm going to turn it over to Grant. Go ahead, Grant.
Okay, Grant.
Yeah, maybe you could sort of give a background. The idea of the one is something that's fascinated me for a long time, based on what you said. I've run into somebody else who talked about the one. My one question would be, have you ever run into anybody else in your experiences and talking to other experiencers?
Just recently, there was one lady that she was very close to what I've been revealed concerning the one. And I've drawn a picture, and I'm hoping that people will realize and see the truth within it, and also who the one is. That will be in the book, Lifting the Veil.
Can you talk about the initial early experience, how you weren't allowed to talk about it, and how it's changed now?
Well, it was difficult, yeah. The researchers they worked so very hard to bring the information to the public, and they tried so hard in order to get, the information forward of what the one had spoken to me about. But I'll tell you right now, and you will see in the new book, that it was impossible for me to bring it forward at that time because I was too young. I had an experience when I was 13. First of all, when I was 12 years old, I was told that they were going to take me at that point, and it turned out that it was 13 years instead. I was 13 years old, and that's when I had an experience where I was taken up into a moonship and put through certain things and everything and brought before the One. And at that time, I was told different things, but being so young, it was just too hard to understand. It was such bright light all the time involved. It was just, I just could not understand everything. However, my mind took it in. However, it wasn't accepting it until later years. I think that is why now I understand who he is.
Just a brief comment. I don't think you were on when I talked about this. The person that I ran into was a fellow out of Las Vegas. Brett Oldham is his name. He wrote a book called Children of the Greys. And what he was dealing with the Greys. He talked to the tall Grey, and he confronted the Grey, and he said to the tall Grey, he said, "What's your concept of God?" And he said the Grey just looked at him and said, "We are one with the One who is all." And when I heard you, I went, "Wow, there's some significant something significant going on behind the scenes here." So is yours like a God type concept, a very high level?
Yes, it is, Grant. And what he said is very true. And perhaps what I have been given, maybe it will open the understanding a lot more.
Wow.
I hope so, and I believe it will, because we have all these different religions on Earth, and each one has the same, has similarities, but obviously can be very different. And yet all these beings talk about that there's obviously a superior being, but at the same time, they don't have differences like we do. And yet we're talking about different interstellar, different intergalactic, and different interdimensional beings, all referencing the same thing.
And they have to be anyway. They have to be in order to become one.
Bob, what do you think about the statement that Betty made about the one, and did you have any experience with regards to that?
Yeah, that statement is absolutely correct. Now, what you need, as far as myself, in the beginning, I've been a technician all my life. I've worked on everything from automobiles to computers to hydrogen fuel cells. Everything with me in the beginning was nuts and bolts. Okay, the craft are solid physical craft, and the abductions are solid abductions of physical people. Well, on one of my experiences, or abductions, I saw a solid physical being turn into a being of just pure light. Another time, Betty and I were abducted together from our home when we lived in Meriden, Connecticut. And we were literally pulled out of our bodies in the spirit, if you will, soul, spirit, whatever. So at that point, I kind of had to look at my thought process and say, well, something's wrong here because this is not a physical thing. And on this particular experience, when Betty and I were taken together, she was set off in one area for, I guess, a learning experience. I was taken into another area by two of the very tall, white-haired, I don't know, I'm 6 foot tall, and I came up, the top of my head came just about to the bottom of their shoulders. So these are fairly tall people, maybe 7 foot or so. And they had white gowns on, and Betty's described them in the past. They had blue eyes and white, very light white hair. And they told me that, for one thing, when you die, you do not die. Your physical body will come to an end of its time. But they said that the actual light being is the real you. That's the part that survives and goes on. And they went into some detail about how your actions on Earth will affect what the next step is for you. I mean, there were several pages in the book on this. I can't, do it all off the top of my head. But they went into things about God, about the, believe it or not, about the importance of animals, and many other things. So at this point, I had no choice. I just had to say, hey, this is not a totally physical experience anymore. There is a spiritual side, and there is a God involved, which, as I said, when I was younger, the way I went was totally different than the way Betty had gone.
Grant has a question, and before I turn it over to Grant, we do have another listener question, so I'm going to turn it over to Grant, but right after that, Betty, I was wondering if you could answer the listener question, which I'll tell you that right now, which was essentially if you still speak in tongues since regression, but you could answer that after Grant. Go ahead, Grant.
Okay, we're talking about this sort of the God concept, the spiritual, the consciousness. You must have, the same as me, run into piles of people who come to you and say, these are intruders, these are a threat, had a terrible time. When you are confronted with another experiencer who has this sort of mindset, how do you answer it to them?
Well, first of all, I've had very few.
Is that right?
Like that, very few, yeah. And the ones that maybe a couple that have spoken like that, but it hasn't been real harsh. It has been help me to understand. That's more or less what I received for what they needed.
And so, what do you say to them? How do you help somebody who is in that situation?
Well, I at first tell them exactly what I've experienced and everything, and that they showed love. They are keepers of nature in all natural form. They're angelic. This helps some of the people, But as I said, very few have I run into that are angry or upset that they're evil or something. And
good.
I can't say that they are because what I experienced, it was fearful at times, but I mean, they always seemed fine with me.
Beautiful.
The beings.
Back to the listener question. He's been asking for quite some time, so it might be well past that point, but essentially it said when you were under the hypnotic regression or hypnosis session, there was a blue balls of lights in the room with everyone seeing it, and you were also was able to disclose certain things about the event, and you were also speaking in tongues. And the question was, do you still speak in tongues?
Well, I haven't for a long time, but I still have received the gift of the fiery tongues. So, matter of fact, the beings reminded me of the blessing that I had received during a time that I had been at church. I was not aware that two of the elder angels were there watching. And what happened, my mother and father was with me. It was believe it or not, a Pentecostal meeting. And people would stand up and tell them, what God had done for them and give a tithe. Well, I stood up and I started to thank God for all the blessings that He has given me, even though I've had hard times. I mean, we all have hard times, but God is always there watching over you. So what happened was the being showed me what the blessing was, because I had forgotten it. But what had happened during the church meeting was there was the minister at the pulpit. His wife was sitting in the back of him with the Word of God in her hands, and there was a whole group of people there, as I said, thanking God, giving their testimony of what the Lord had done in their life for them, and tithing. Well, I stood up. I wasn't wealthy at all, and I said, I don't have much money, but I want to give something to God back. And I was crying, and I said that I want to use the gift that He has given me for His glory. And all of a sudden, the minister's wife came off the front and down the stairs and ran to me, and she placed her hand on my forehead and started to speak in the unknown tongues. And when she stopped, the minister said that I would be blessed among women. Above women, something like that. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm going to do something better than the Lord's Mother Mary. It means that there is a job that I have to do, and it may even seem like a man's job, but I must do it for the Lord, and that's what I have gleaned from what that blessing is to be.
That's actually a remarkable story. And going back to what earlier you were saying about the bodies and passing away, I actually have a couple interpretations, and I was wondering maybe if either of you can explain this, because this makes perfect sense with what I've heard from other people. There's obviously those believe in karma, that you need to do what you need to do because that will affect the outcome of your life. Essentially, some people, the traditional religion systems will use heaven or hell. Hence, if you're good, you'll go one place. If you're bad, you go to another. The other people, the other thinking that I've heard that I think is remarkable, that this has come from other people who have been taken, and maybe you guys can comment on this, was that you are on this living body, and the reason why you don't remember what your past life, since your soul never really dies and it never is born, it's maybe reborn as without a new memory, but you have to have a mission / learn a lesson, and you can't really move on to the furthest dimension or the next place without having your soul learn what it needs to learn. Have you heard anything along the lines of that?
Well, that is why we have so many different religions and things, to try and show God what God is all about. The thing is, we have to have all the, God has created good and He has created evil. The only thing is that certain things have to take a certain time to accomplish things. Now, either it will become or it will end, depending upon how it is carried out. This is some of the things I'm trying to show with the one in the book that we have written. Even though we don't understand these things, it doesn't mean that it is always going to be a certain way. Like there are so many different religions and everything, but there's only the main one that is taking care of everything.
The ultimate ones that every one of these extraterrestrials speaks about. I think that was well said that you said that. And I think in your next book, if you're able to explain the one to everybody, that might be what your mission was.
Exactly. That is what I have put in the new book. And it's strange how it happened, because as I was writing part of the book, all of a sudden I stopped writing and I had to draw a picture. I drew a picture of a face. Now, even though I did not see the image of the one, it was mostly bright light at most all the times, and I heard his voice. The thing was, I had to draw a face, and after I drew that face, all the rest came together. And I'm getting the chills right now because it reveals who he is and how wonderful he is.
See, the fact that you're getting chills, two things shows in me. First of all, the passion of it and the importance of what you're about to say. And then I'm also wondering if subconsciously there's something more to what you know consciously, that it's giving you the chills because the importance of what you're about to explain to everybody far exceeds what we're capable of even understanding at this moment.
Right at this moment, perhaps. But the thing is, once you see the picture and once you hear what was given to me, I think that you will see and understand life will not seem as difficult as it has been lately.
Speaking of pictures, this is probably going to carry over to the next hour, and the same thing. We'll go back to Bob's encounters with the Air Force, which I think personally it was AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigation, who, along with the Naval Special Investigation Office and Naval Office of Naval Special Investigations, they, I don't know if they're competing or working amongst, but the point being is they're deeply, deeply involved, and obviously we'll get those the next hour. But there are several pictures that are even in this latest book, the fifth one that was just released, that is being distributed now. And I was wondering if you could comment on some of that. One of them is the bottom of the craft. I don't know which one of you observed it. Maybe it was you, Betty?
Yeah. What happened was that was in 1967 when I was taken out of my home. We stood before the craft, and what happened was the leader, Quasgar, raised his hand, and when he did, he made the bottom transparent so I could see a great deal of how the craft worked. And there were these crystal orbs with these metallic stems connected to it in a smaller orb on the top, and two amateurs that came out that held the crystal wheel, and it rotated around a tube. Now, what's so strange is they told me, even at another time, that they used mercury and gel in a certain way to fly the craft. And now today, scientists are finding out that it works. The strange thing is just recently, my daughter, who was here just before Thanksgiving, we happened to be talking because she wanted to find out about the older house where the 1957 encounter happened, where the cellar door was, where it was located, because she couldn't remember because she was so young at the time. Well, and then she went on to say about how they played over in the cement foundation, which used to be a barn, I believe, at one time. They found mercury. And they were playing with mercury in their hands, swishing it from side to side. They found mercury in the cement, on top of the cement foundation. And that was one of the things that the being said that they used. So I thought perhaps the craft was over there that evening of 1967 and somehow leaked some of the mercury out of their craft, because after they did land in the backyard there, the area that the craft was on, the grass never grew. But and I imagine mercury would stunt the growth of grass or vegetation. But it was so shocking to me to learn that my children out there playing with mercury like it was Play-Doh, swishing it back and forth in your hands, and they never told me until now. Here it is, we're in 2015, and my daughter told me about it. And that was one of the things that the being said that they used was mercury and a certain type of gel.
I'm wondering if it was something that was expelled from the craft or anyhow.
Right, that's what I think it was, yeah.
And that's fascinating. I wonder if your children just forgot to mention it, or it was just a memory that has surfaced.
They never mentioned it. They were out there playing with it, and that was all of the children saw it, and they all handled it. And after then, when my daughter told me, I says, "What? Mercury is poison. What in the world were you doing? Holding on to it like that?" I just recently learned that a lot of scientists that are involved with the new type of craft, Bob could probably tell you that the mercury does something.
Well, they found by rotating mercury at high speed in an enclosed tube, it reduces the effect of gravity by approximately 89%. And this is rumored to be in one of the so-called secret craft, the TR-3B. But, I can't prove that. This is information that has come along over time. But, I couldn't bring it and say, here's the craft, take a look, unfortunately.
But here it is, way back in 1967, the children were over by the cement foundation on our property playing with mercury. But now, mercury just doesn't appear out of nowhere.
Exactly, and it's a very dangerous material.
Yes.
And with that being said, though, we are coming to our break, and everybody will take a quick 3-minute short break, and we'll be right back. Much, much more with Betty, Andreasson, Luca, Bob Luca, and of course my special co-host of the day, Grant Cameron. This is Dr. J. We'll be right back. Hey, Betty and Bob, if you can hear me, got a few minutes. Got 3 minutes. Do what you need. Over the music. Grant, can you watch out for the background noise? Welcome back to Hour 2 of Researchers on a Mission. I am your host, Dr. J, and I have a very special co-host with me today, and that is Grant Cameron. And before we return back to our amazing guests, Betty Andreasson Luca and her husband, Bob Luca, both of who have been taken, and if you've been hearing this fascinating hour of their experiences, and more than likely what I believe, and they believe as well, is that they were brought together by these extraterrestrials. But let me give you first some announcements of what's going to come on Rome Radio. This Thursday, stay tuned with us for Stanton Friedman. Next week, of course, is Jim Mars, and he will be taking calls. He would love to get some of your feedback as well. And, of course, in the next couple weeks and even further, Kathleen Martin's going to be making a return. Dr. Greer as well, Congressman Cook from the Citizen Hearing, as well as Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Timothy Good, and Nick Pope, if I didn't already say that. And with that being said, let's go back to Betty Andreasson and Bob Luca. Their website that you could check everything out is andreassonaffair.com. But let me give this opportunity to give Betty and Bob a chance to say where you can be contacted, if that's your main site or if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Yes, Bob would be able to tell you what.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're both also on Facebook. You can look me up at Bob Luca and Betty Andreasson on Facebook, and you'll find some photos of the helicopters that tracked us and some government documents, some of Betty's drawings, and we will be adding to it more in the coming weeks.
Well, Speaking of drawings, that actually brings me to my next thing. And real quick, let me throw out my website so you guys can hear where this interview will be archived, as well as the recent uploads of Jaime Maussan, Eric Von Doniken, and Sean Stone are. And that's drjradiolive.com. It's the same name is for every social media account, from Twitter, Facebook, to Flickr, Tumblr, and of course YouTube. DRJ Radio Live. And let's go, before we get to the pictures, the amazing pictures that I've seen several on the website, and I've seen the pictures of the black helicopters, but I think this is a good time to actually start talking about the government interference that even I've seen. I was getting worried leading up to tonight that they weren't receiving my emails and I wasn't receiving theirs. And sure enough, when I spoke to Bob on the phone, he'd received them and he'd sent them back. And of course, I didn't receive them at all. And I think he's going to be able to pick up the story from where that point is, because there's so much more leading up to that. Let me turn it over to you, Bob.
Okay, great. Well, the most recent, which you're speaking of, the United States Navy Space Weapons Division and the U.S. Army both hacked into my computer within a 48-hour period. Now, at the time, I had been working as a computer technician for Gateway Computers, and so I had some pretty good software in my computer. And that software resulted in me catching them and actually getting the physical street address. They're both Department of Defense computers. I got the ID number of the computers, the day, the date, the name of the operator. So I wrote to the Department of Defense and asked why they were in my computer. And I got a response from the Inspector General of the Army first, and he did admit in writing that, yes, it was their computers, and that an investigation would be done. Well, I'm sure you know what kind of investigation was done. I've been chasing him for years now over this, and I finally started to file Freedom of Information Act requests, and they just fluffed me off. Oh, we can't find the documents. Even though I had the exact date, time, case number, computer number, street number, they couldn't find it. So I went to my state senator, and I asked for some help. Well, he queried them, and he got the same thing. They fluffed him off, too. So I went to the United States Attorney General, and I said, look, basically I sent him all the material and related documents, and I said, this, plain and simple, is an illegal act, and I would like your office to investigate it. And just today, in today's mail, I got a letter back saying that, from the Department of Justice, stating that because it's a federal law, I have to go through the FBI first. So now I have to do all the paperwork over and go to the FBI, and which, you know, is going to lead me nowhere, but at least I've got a paper trail showing what has been happening with this. But in the beginning, in 1978, when the first book was ready to come out, that is when this really started to get heavy. Our house started to be overflown by helicopters, and what was unusual, these helicopters were all black. They had no ID markings, which is against federal regulations. So I took some pictures. I sent them to Ray Fowler. He said, well, you're probably in a flight zone. Well, okay. But the flights got so low that our neighbors, one of them who was a city councilwoman, started to document them. They'd come down low enough, and usually it was two kinds. It was usually either Huey UH-1, or later on after we moved was a Sikorsky Blackhawk. And there were no numbers on these, and they were all black. And they started, when we left Meriden, Connecticut, we moved to Cheshire, Connecticut. And our neighbor verified that the flights stopped when we moved. And they started in Cheshire, Connecticut when we moved there. And I'm not talking about an ordinary overflight of a helicopter. We had had them come over at times, barely clearing a big maple tree out front. I'm talking maybe 75 to 100-foot altitude, and go directly over our house. Now, federal aviation regulations state that a helicopter has to leave 500 feet laterally between buildings. And I know this because I was taking my flying lessons at the time, getting my pilot's license. So they were in violation. I took hundreds of pictures, and I sent them. I started out with the FAA, and they said, well, we can't help you because there's no identification numbers on them. I said, well, that's why I'm sending the pictures, because these helicopters don't belong here. And one fellow from the Federal Aviation, General Aviation District Office in Boston got so interested that he drove down on his own time on a weekend, and unannounced, unfortunately, and we weren't home, but he did leave a note on my door. I called him a couple of days later when we got back, and I was told by the FAA that he had been transferred to another office, and they didn't know how I could get a hold of him.
Go figure.
And this was verified when Connecticut Magazine did an article on us. They actually tracked the guy down. I think he was living in New Hampshire at the time, and he said he just had a vague memory of it. But anyways, a lot of people would get irritated or frustrated with this stuff, and Betty and I kind of take things as they come, and I've got maybe an excessive sense of humor sometimes. So I worked with a fellow that said, Bob, you want to have a little fun with these helicopters? So I said, sure. Well, he was recently out of the military, and he built me an exact replica of a surface-to-air missile. I mean, it was a thing of beauty the way he made it. It looked like the real deal. So one morning, or afternoon, we hear the whop, 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 the very distinctive rotor blade noise from a Huey UH-1 approaching our house from the north, which was on the front side of our house. Now, I know that this guy couldn't see much until he cleared our roof because I had flown over our house myself. So we got out back on the south side of the house, and we set up the surface-to-air missile, and we're standing there. Along comes a helicopter a little bit to the west of our house, probably 1 yard over. So we were looking at the side of the helicopter as he approached. When he spotted that, and he was looking down, that helicopter turned so tightly, we were looking at the bottom of it. And he whipped around to the right, made an evasive turn, and headed back where he came from. And Betty and I were both laughing. I told her, I said, I bet you that fellow's heading back where he come from so he can get a shower and a change of shorts. Because obviously he saw what we had on the ground there and mistook it for the real thing.
Bob, can I ask you a question about this?
Of course.
You, as you may know, I chased the President of the United States around. So the question I would ask for you is, what do you think they're doing in terms of watching you and Betty? And number two, if you were the President of the United States, what would you do?
Hang on a second. Actually, they were sadly disconnected, so we got to bring them right back. Okay. The moment you started talking, that's pretty odd. I'm wondering if that happens on purpose. Yeah, you just got dropped. We're off fine, and we're all on air. And right as Grant was asking that question, because it's very important about what he's going to say. Anyway, go ahead, Grant. Now they're back.
It appears they don't like this question. So my question to Bob is, what do you think they're doing in terms of watching you and Betty? What are they up to? And the second a question I have related is, if you were the President of the United States, what would you do about the UFO situation?
Okay, first off, I was told, Betty and I were at a lecture in Phoenix, Arizona. And during a break, I was approached by a man that, to me, was obviously military. He had short cut hair, stood very erect, buttons straight down the front of his shirt, matched up with his belt buckle. He had sharply creased pants and highly polished black shoes. Now, to me, this is a military or an intelligence guy, or not your average Joe. And he told me, he says, the reason we are sending these helicopters is so we don't have to hurt you. That's what the man told me. So as far as I'm concerned, it is intimidation, and I can get into that in a little more detail after. Now, as far as if I was the President of the United States, the people in this country have paid in their hard-earned money, their tax dollars, which the government has used to investigate the phenomena, and then turn around and treated us like children and hides it from you. That's not right. Disclosure needs to happen. The government is dead wrong here. And, you know, in the early days, Betty can tell you, I chased after the Pentagon. I went after the FBI on phone. I challenged them to do a TV show with us because the FBI made a statement that kind of looked like Betty and I weren't being quite honest. So this is why we were doing a newscast. So I asked the FBI to appear on the show with us and discuss their documents that I had at the time and not our case, and they backed out. The Pentagon finally told me, Air Force Headquarters, that no one there would talk to me anymore because I brought up documents that I had gotten from Freedom of Information, and I said, you people are telling the public one thing, and these documents indicate that you're lying. You know, what's the story here? I want to talk to somebody. And they just finally gave up on me. They wouldn't talk to me anymore. I'll tell you another one. Betty and I were at NASA. We were on vacation in Florida. And when we went in, we went to the guard station, and we told them that we were doing the book, which we were considering, and we'd like to talk to the administrator to do an interview. The interview was arranged. Betty and I started walking down to his office, which was quite a long walk from where we were. When we got to his office, I don't know if somebody recognized us or what, but we were met at the door by a secretary who was visibly shaking or nervous, and she said that the administrator was no longer there. Well, he was there, 10 minutes ago, but they ran out. He ran out on us, literally. I called the CIA. I asked them for an interview, and they wouldn't talk to me either. So why are these big government agencies so afraid to talk to somebody? Who Betty and I are nobody. We're a couple of people that had an unusual experience. Yet they were actually backed away from us when we confronted them directly.
Well, also, during the MIT lecture, Bob and I were there, and Dr. Hynek, when I was just standing there alone, Dr. Hynek rushed over to me, and he says, Betty, stick to philosophy and leave the government out of it. So I think he was trying to warn me to warn Bob.
I think so. Actually, Grant wrote something amazing, and he didn't have a chance to say it. So if it's okay, Grant, can I say it?
Sure, go ahead.
He said, obviously, the government is listening to you guys right now. They're this broadcast. They are listening. You know they are. If they're hacking into your files and keeping tabs on you and listening to your phone calls, if you have something to say to them, right now is a very good time to send a message.
Yeah. Well, they also, when I got a job updating the city directory, the thing was, I told the girls in the office about my encounter, and the salesman would often go out, to make orders here and there in different parts of the town and city, and he knew his number by heart, and he would call the boss maybe several times a day. So he knew his number, the telephone number, by heart. And he came in the office all excited, and he said, you're not going to believe it. I called, and I got the Pentagon, and the Pentagon number was nowhere near the number for the updating the city directory where I was working. I asked him if he would write it down for me, what happened, and sign it, and he said yes, he would. So I have that paper.
Wow.
The thing with them is I would like very much for someone in authority to come sit down and talk to us, but they won't do that for whatever reason. Because I think what they're doing is wrong. They've been lying to the public at least since Roswell, and God knows probably before. And I think it's about time the American people were told what is really happening. Like Podesta said, the American people can handle it. Not a problem. Just open up and be honest. But with this government, that seems to be a problem.
I agree. Well, and then go ahead. I was going to say, I think I have the reason why. I don't think it's that we can't handle it. I'm starting to think that it's about the technology, because if we have their technology, then
it is. And I'll give you an example, a more earthly example. In Florida, I worked on. I was a research technician on hydrogen fuel cells, and this company that I worked for developed a unit that was the size of a refrigerator. It was meant to be installed in a home, and it would provide heat, hot water, and electricity. It had no moving parts, gave off no pollution, and required only a filter change once a year. Now, these things were ready to go into production. And this isn't secondhand information. I worked on the actual fuel cells. What happened was 2 oil companies came in, and 60 days later, approximately 60 days later, we all went to a big meeting, and we all got laid off. And are you there?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
That was on your end. Yeah.
Okay. And we all got laid off. I just recently wrote the company, because this was in 2001, and I just recently wrote them and said, I made like I was an interested buyer and said, I'd like to purchase one for my home. Where are they? Because I haven't seen anything of them since that time. So you're right. Technology, the beings have technology. Obviously, they're not pulling into a gas station and filling up at the pump for their craft. They have technology that will take a lot of dollars away from those that are in power now. With what they have, we won't need probably the huge pharmaceutical giants that hook you on pills and keep you on them for the rest of your life. We probably wouldn't need a gasoline. So yeah, technology I think is a big part of the reason. Just like why Nikola Tesla was put down before he could develop his system of wireless electricity for everybody.
Right.
And yet now we're using the alternating current, whereas when he was advocating that, Edison shut him down for the DC current. And let me throw this out there too. Our good friend, the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, former Defense Minister of Canada,
right?
As you know, how he got into this, he read the book the day after Roswell and was able to cross-check the contents of that book with the people that were still alive, the generals and the colonels, and they were able to verify that everything was correct. And so that's what got him on the road. And he says, without a doubt, through his sources, that at the minimum for the last 20 years, if not further, he can validate at least up until 20 years ago, minimum, that they have the technologies that could essentially end our use for fossil fuels and provide energy for free. And like you said, the pharmaceutical companies are strictly there to hook us on and essentially create a slave race, especially with this giant pharmaceutical opiate run. But with that being said, Grant's got a question, and I'm going to turn it over to him. Go ahead, Grant.
Already?
Yeah, just a related question to this. Betty mentioned the Mercury thing. Looking back over your experiences, Bob, and maybe Betty has another story, do you think you've been given technology that the government might be sort of sitting there and trying to see what you're being told?
That's probably one of the reasons that they tried to get into my computer, but everything is not on my computer because we're not quite that dumb. We do have 2 other computers in the house that are not on the internet.
There were some pictures that I drew also about the craft, and we were going for a lecture, and when we returned home, our house was broken into, and there were about 3 drawings that were stolen.
Of the propulsion system.
Speaking of drawings, unless Grant has another follow-up to this,
I just got a little bit of a follow-up to that. Are you familiar with the free organization that Edgar Mitchell is on the board of directors, the Experiencers?
Yes.
Unfortunately, vaguely right now, I would have to say.
They are doing a study. Edgar Mitchell's on the board for free, and they're doing a study, and they've had 500 experiencers who have filled out the survey. And out of that, I think it's 190 people have answered positive to the question, have you been on a ship and come off the ship with something that you didn't have when you went on in terms of technology, downloads? And so that's the question I'm sort of getting at here, is this idea that experiencers are being downloaded with material, mathematics, propulsion type stuff. And the government, the way I look at it, is sort of just watching to see what they're trying to figure this thing out. And they can't really sit down and have a meeting with you because they're claiming they're not involved. So they basically monitor your email and try to see if you're talking about it. So you have been shown propulsion type stuff.
Betty has seen most of the propulsion system of the craft in high detail.
Wow.
And she has drawn it in very high detail.
Wow.
Bob, I actually have another question for a listener directed to you. You talk about the TR3B. Is this a craft that you witnessed, or were you specifically talking about the crafts you witnessed from the extraterrestrials, and you think that the Mercury was involved with the TR3B?
The craft that I was involved with, I'm not sure I got the question. Was it?
He's asking if the TRB3 is the craft.
Oh, yeah. A number of people that might be in a place to know claim this thing exists. Now, one thing I find interesting, Ben Rich, who was the head of Skunk Works,
yes,
before he passed away, had said that we have the technology now to take ET home. And there is a man that should know.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I believe that astronaut Gordon Cooper wrote something about him in his book some time ago. I can't remember exactly right now. But I believe that was a statement that he said that we have the technology now to take ET home.
You're absolutely right. It was to the UCLA alumni department, the engineering department, and he said that statement. He also, at the end of his lecture, showed a slide of a flying saucer essentially leaving. And he said, we have things in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas envious. And then the famous quote that you said, and we have the technologies to take ET home. He also threw in that we've had the equations wrong, or we corrected them, and there was a mistake in the equation, something along the lines of that. And I think that shows that they solved it, and they've been using this technology. But with that being said, Grant has a question. Let's go turn it over to Grant.
You've gotten into an area that very much interests me because I had a download that experienced this sort of thing. One of the things Ben Rich said during that lecture, and that was Jan Hartson asked him the question at the very end. He's leaving the building. Jan Hartson goes to him and he says, I'm very interested in UFOs. I'm very interested in propulsion. How does it work? How do they get here? And Ben Rich turned around and asked and said to him the question, what do you know about ESP? The Canadian government in the 1950s, in 1950, had written a government document, a top-secret document, in which they were told by American officials, this is 1950, that mental phenomena is associated with the flying saucers. So my question to either of you is, have you ever gotten any indications from your experiences that mental phenomena is involved in how they do propulsion or do this kind of stuff? Is there a connection to it?
Well, I think it is. I really do. They have the machines there with all the different works to it, but they have to use their mind in order to control it, I think.
Well, our own military is working on mind-controlled aircraft right now. I don't know.
Yes.
Perhaps they've perfected it by now. I don't know. But there's another aspect, too. There's a fellow that Betty and I met out in California that literally can call down UFOs. And he's done this many times. It's been videotaped. It's been done in public. Robert Bingham is his name.
Yes.
And if you check out his website.
I know him. It's local.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. He's legitimate.
I see him all the time, and it's Fausto Perez as well as Jim Martin are two of the guys that learned from him, and they're out doing their own events now, and they're doing it to spread the word. They each do them at separate parks, and more and more people are learning, and they're doing it on their own. It's almost as Dr. Greer's CE5, only they don't follow this strict set of protocols. And essentially, it's crazy to talk about yet, but when you see it for yourself, you're sort of blown away. They go into this meditative state, and then everyone's scanning the skies. There's nothing there, and out of nowhere, there will appear 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever objects they'll be, and they'll act bizarrely. There are several videos out this. You could actually Google Fausto Perez, and you'll find it. I think Grant has got another question. Go ahead, Grant.
It really didn't, but you've got one here that I think we'd brought up before the show. We were talking. Betty, in terms of when you were being regressed, were you able to, during your regression, actually talk to the aliens and ask questions?
I don't recall during the regression. I'm 78 years old now, so a lot of the things it is difficult for me to remember. I've been through so much, not only with the UFO phenomena, but with family and terrible things that have happened. And also we have a lot of paranormal things going on that seems to be connected with it. But I think that's with the mind that is also involved.
I can comment on that because I do remember one session where the investigators were actually able to converse with the beings through Betty. She probably doesn't remember because she was under hypnosis at the time.
Yeah.
But another thing that I'd like to mention, a lot of these things, that we've experienced sound very strange, but a lot of them were actually witnessed by the investigators and other people as well at different places we have lived at and so on, like Larry Fawcett, the police officer. Even the psychiatrist in Betty's case witnessed two events that happened at our home. He came to re-interview her, I think, a year or two after the initial examination. And the guy ended up, he was passing through our areas. He called us, asked if he could stay. He'd come down and talk to her. And he came about 9 o'clock at night, stayed till about 5:30 in the morning. And while we were sitting there was Betty and I in the house and the doctor. And all of a sudden, there was a huge crash in the kitchen. So we all got up and went and looked, and absolutely nothing was out of place. And, I mean, this was very, very loud. Then when he was going home, getting ready to go home, was about 5:30 or so in the morning. It was just getting light, and we're standing outside talking. And there was this huge cloud, cigar-shaped cloud that stopped almost over our house. And it was, if I had to estimate, I'd say maybe a quarter of a mile in length. Very dense in the center, and as it got out to the edge, both edges were thinner so you could just barely see some starlight through them. And we're standing there talking, and finally he looked at me. He said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw it, but I wasn't going to mention it until you saw it first." I didn't want him thinking I had a problem. But a lot of times, I happened to be in a sporting goods store one time buying a firearm, and Betty was outside, parked in the car. A helicopter came over the store, and this is weird because the blades were kind of quiet. I don't know how they silence them. I know they have the technology. And it literally hovered over the store while I was in there purchasing this firearm. And the interesting thing is, across the street at the time was a man who had been working for the Meriden Record newspaper in that town, Meriden, Connecticut. And he witnessed it, and he came over and told Betty that he had seen it at the same time. Now, you might think, well, big deal, they hover over the roof. But they have thermography and other things. They can see inside the building, through the walls, through the roof. That's old technology, really.
Yeah, that's machinery, but the power of the mind is very important. I mean, we just have not used enough of our mind. Just prayer alone, you can see how prayer works and has things happening. It's concentration and belief and faith, I think, that really come into play there. And I think that's what the beings able to use their minds to be able to fly the machines. So it is physical as well.
Thank you for saying that, Betty. I'll tell you why. I've always been saying we use such a small portion of our brain.
Yeah.
What would happen if we used all of it? And then going to your point on prayer, have you ever heard of the Maharishi effect?
No, I haven't.
Okay, if you could put 1 unit, I'm just making numbers up now. If you could put 1 unit for each person praying or meditating, then one person praying or meditating would produce 1 unit of that power. If you put 10 people, the number goes up exponentially. So I'm making up a number maybe to 100. If you put 2,000 people or 1,000 people, it would be maybe equivalent to millions. The point I'm trying to get at is clearly there's something there because this information has come from the beings themselves as well as some people who have participated in experiments. There was a specific experiment done for 7 days where I think 1,000 people in Washington, D.C. were meditating for peace. And in that week, they had record low crime. And that was, a recent, within the last 10 years. And going back to something earlier you said, Bob, about them, both of you, with regards to them operating the craft with their mind. The U.S. government, you're absolutely right. They were trying to create, and they possibly have created, these mind-controlled craft. And the reason I know this is courtesy of Sean Stone, son of Oliver Stone. I was able to meet this, to speak to someone. She doesn't want to come public again. She appeared on the show Conspiracy Theory, so if anybody can put two and two together, then you know who I'm talking about. But she was participated in a study when she was in college because she had enhanced psychic abilities, per se, enhanced mind abilities, where Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, used students from the University of Ohio, and what they did was they were testing to see if their brains and thoughts can have any control on piloting an aircraft, and specifically not a machine, but an aircraft. And I thought that was really important. Grant, go ahead. You have a comment?
Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, just the simple fact of, the plane being a machine, you have the person that's flying that plane has to use their brain in order to get that plane to where it has to go and do the maneuvers that it has to do. So that's just a small, tiny bit of the brain being used to fly a plane or drive a car.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I sort of lecture on this, one of the things I show if people want to know how effective this is, if you Google search F-22, which is a jet fighter, F-22 and rat, you'll come across a video from the University of Southern Florida in which they take 25,000 neurons from a rat's brain. We have 100 billion in our brain. This is 25,000 neurons, and you watch on there. They actually put the neurons in a petri dish, which is wired, has wires with electrodes into it, and they actually fly an F-22 simulator with this 25,000 neurons from a rat brain. It's unbelievable how the thing the brain starts to talk. You can see the connections starting to be made, and the brain becomes like a little brain, and they fly. And I have talked to George Filer, who you may know, he's in your area there.
Right.
I asked George Filer when I was lecturing. I was in New Jersey giving this lecture. I said to George, how hard is it to fly an F-22 simulator? He said it's not easy. So here you look at that, and you can see the potential of this idea of the mind, how powerful the mind actually is.
Oh, absolutely.
Exactly.
Look how far Einstein got without the use of computers.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and there's a current movie out, Lucy, and again, this is science fiction, the movie, but it begs the question of what can we do when we unlock more and more of the brain. And it goes that this woman, Lucy, is exposed to some drug that creates this explosive growth in your brain. And she goes up through the different levels of 20% unlocking that, 30, 40, 50, etc. And at each stage, something more is going on. So at first she could have telepathy. Then she could see literally into the DNA and molecules of things. Then she can control her own metabolism, then start to control other people and matter. And this fits exactly with some of these extraterrestrials, not just with the telepathy and telekinesis, but shapeshifters. If you're able to control your own metabolism, control matter, what is it that you essentially can do? Shapeshift. And I just thought that was really fascinating.
Well, one prime example, when Betty was taken out behind her house when the craft was on the bank there, the leader, Quasgar, raised his hand, and as he waved his hand, the bottom of the craft, which looked metallic, became transparent so she could see the inner workings. That's what that picture was about. And it appeared to be solid, again, a solid physical object until he did that. So apparently he was controlling that by the mind only.
And I think it's just a matter of time before we're able to do so. And when Grant mentioned what Edgar Mitchell is studying, and this goes back to that same course, which people will hear the interview, because right after Edgar Mitchell comes on Shannon Panzo, the founder of this company called Zox Pro, where he's trying to teach people to keep. Okay, let me explain what him and Edgar Mitchell explain as photographic memory. Anybody out there has some sort of memory from their early childhood where they could remember everything from the detail to the smell, what the person was wearing, what they said, every word, every color, everything. The reason being is everything you look at, everything you hear is automatically stored permanently, like as it's photographed in your head. The reason that you're able to remember that is for some reason your conscious mind has a direct open link to that subconscious memory. He's trying to teach us how to permanently keep our conscious mind open, and hence everything that you would do, you'd be able to unlock. So for instance, photographic memory of flipping through pages of books, well, you'd process those words, and this is proven. This is proven, and I thought it was a really interesting thing that since Edgar Mitchell was actually the spokesperson for this company, and that's what brought it up in this last interview with him. So it's really fascinating.
Is he actually, in other words, bridging the subconscious to the conscious, so it's like a solid connection that's there permanently?
Exactly. You couldn't have said it in better terms. That is what he is teaching. He's teaching to keep your conscious bridged permanently with your subconscious rather than hitting your subconscious here and there. I do want to warn you both, everybody, we got about 15 minutes left. And I want to use this time to go wherever you want to go. We do have some more listener questions. I know I got several more. Grant's got several more. We will absolutely have to do more interviews in the future because we will always run out of time because there's so much fascinating information. But I wanted to ask you too, if there's anything specific that you wanted us to, or that you wanted to speak about, or if you want to continue with us on the path that we've been on.
Well, there is one thing that we didn't touch on at all that involves, and may even be fearful to some people. After having these UFO experiences, it seems like paranormal seems to follow you. And we've had some very strange occurrences. And I'm going to say something on the air now that I rarely talk about as far as myself. From the time, for a long time now, 30 years or more, I see things from time to time that are not there. It might be people, it might be craft, machines. I have gone to 2 very good eye doctors over a period of years, and there's nothing wrong with my eyes. They're quite healthy. I have gone for brain scans and so on, and everything looks normal. And yet, since either the experience or there's another possibility. I was also struck by lightning when I was younger. Mm-hmm. So something, the way my doctor explained it is the wiring in my brain has been changed, altered. But I can't say if it's from being struck by lightning or from the UFO phenomena. So that's one thing that I've experienced. But Betty and I both have experienced some very odd things in the houses that we've lived in, and they have been witnessed by the investigators, by neighbors. I'm going to give you one example that was really odd. The house we lived in Meriden, Connecticut, one morning, the bedrooms were upstairs. One morning we came downstairs, and the crown molding, which is up on the wall, between the wall and the ceiling, was all on the floor from the 4 walls. The nails, the finishing nails, were still in the wall. The glasses in the cabinet had white squiggly lines on them, almost as if they were etched. And there was a large stainless steel saucepan like you would make spaghetti sauce in, and it was the very top lip of the pan is rolled. Now, stainless steel is very tough. That pan actually split right wide open at that point, right where the roll was. And this house, we had problems with lights going off and on. We saw, everyone saw people in the house at one time or another. I chased a guy into the basement one day only to get down there and find out no one was there. The girls had witnessed people that they thought was me walking around when I wasn't there. We'd sit in the dining room downstairs, and we'd hear people walking upstairs. And this followed us in almost every place we have lived in.
Yeah, my daughter Cindy, now we had a telephone put upstairs so the girls could use it. And they got a telephone call, and Bonnie told Cindy that there was somebody on the phone for her. And she started talking with the young man that had called. It turned out the man had passed away some time ago, and she was really shocked and upset. There was another time in this house that, we'd have the lights turn on for no reason at all. And I happened to, after we sold the house, I happened to be in a supermarket, and the lady was there, and she says, I had some strange things happen. And I thought, I was all ears, but wondering what it was. She said that we came home one evening. All the lights were out at first. We came home, and we went to open the door, and every light in the house, inside and outside, down in the basement and upstairs, went on. And they don't know how that happened. But we've had, like Bob said, a lot of paranormal things, not only for us, but our children have some unusual things happening like that as well.
Well, I think I could say why, if you don't mind me commenting.
Yeah.
Having these contact with these beings, as Jim Sparks says, it wakes up the muscles that we humans don't use. And then there's this high strangeness, as some people add to it, and hence paranormal effects, psychic abilities. And as a matter of fact, that program I was mentioning, it's not billed as anything but opening your subconscious mind and having a photographic memory, but it also mentions in there that you can have psychic abilities, essentially. So my interpretation of what's happening to both of you is, because of your direct contacts, your brains have been unlocked more so than other people's, which gives you this ability to have telekinesis effects that you may not even control quite yet, but you're doing it straight from your mind. Maybe if you're mad, something will happen. Maybe if you're in a certain emotional state, something happened. Is this normal? And the same thing with your children. At least that's my take from what I've heard.
I have to tell you one thing that happened to us in Florida. Betty and I and two other couples had been at a church service, and after we went to the IHOP in Lake Worth, Florida, for coffee. And we were all sitting at the table. Betty stirred her coffee. She picked up her spoon and held it, and the spoon part fell right off of the handle. Now, the coffee was strong, but not that strong. We were able to take the spoon back. We gave it to Ray Fowler. He gave it to a metallurgist, and there was no logical reason found that spoon should have broken off like that. It just literally fell off while she was holding it, the bowl part.
Grant has a brilliant question. Go for it, Brant.
Yeah, I've got the $64,000 question. I want to ask it before it's over, because I've been so honored to get to talk to two people who have been in this for 70 years. I mean, probably as long as anybody. So the $64,000 question is, when it's all said and done, your best guess, what is going on? Who are these people? And is there a mission? Is there something going on? I know you probably don't have all answers, but I mean, you've thought about it probably a long time. What is actually going on?
Well, I believing that they're angels. Each one has some job to do by the one creator. The thing is, everything is assigned, and these things are going to take place and happen, because it's meant to be. I don't know how to explain it. I don't want to get into the one too much, because it's in the book. But
I can simplify a little bit, because the way I look at it is guidance and education to help lead us to where we need to be. Another thing that I noticed happened to myself and Betty too, and many others. After these experiences, you become much more aware of the environment and just how stupid, in plain English, man is for what he is doing to the very planet that supports his life.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because so many people have been taken say exactly that. As a matter of fact, Jim Sparks, who, just like you, Bob, has had conscious recall, says that he's been on board craft with several other people, and he's ran into at least one of these people that he's talked about at a lecture, probably more, and saw how that person blossomed. And essentially, even though every person starts with fear, they eventually get to the point of blossoming, is how he calls it, flowering.
Yeah, he's right.
And he goes on to say that each one that's been taken has a mission. And a lot of people have mission from whether it be to help people understand, to help people get to disclosure, to help control people who might be in fear and keep them safe. And a lot of them, their job is to start making it aware that we are killing this planet, save the forests, stop the waste of fossil fuels, stop the pollution, because you're right, we are killing this planet. Now, whether we as a species survive, the planet needs to go on. We've only been here a short time, and yet you have 4.5 billion years of history, and we're about to kill it. And that's the sad part.
Well, that's the enemy. That's the adversary that is wanting that to be done. But we also become the enemy at times because we don't step forward and do the right things.
Yes, I agree. And it's time that we start doing. And as Bob said, that man is essentially dumb in that sense. We're fighting these petty little wars. We're killing Mother Earth. I always go back to that statement that Ronald Reagan made. If we were faced from an alien threat from above, wouldn't we all come together and forget our petty little differences and come together as to fight as one? And I think that's such.
What I'm hoping that
we're in a heartbeat.
Yes.
That's what I'm hoping that this book, the one to show exactly what it is, what is going on, and what it is all about, and how it can change.
Grant wrote an amazing word. I think that literally sums it up, and I'm going to go ahead and let him say it. Go ahead, Grant.
Well, it's the concept. I'm doing a book now called Inspiration, where good ideas come from, and I've looked at a number of different aspects, and that seems to be the one main thing. You either believe in oneness or you believe in the individual, that we're here to fight each other, survival of the fittest, and that's what's putting the world off the cliff. And when you suddenly realize that we're all one and that the whole is more important, then you get the main idea of what I think they're doing. Is they're trying to move us from this left brain, selfish, egotistical mind to the right brain, universal mind. That's what I think is going on.
Yes,
absolutely.
That's beautiful. That is so well said. It is beautiful, exactly.
And one thing I really appreciate about Grant and keep inviting him back and back and back is aside from the amazing work he did for decades tracking presidents and UFOs and asking the most important question that I think each time, Grant, sorry, I got to do this. I got to remind everybody out there what they need to do. If you run across a politician, don't ask them if they know about UFOs or are we going to be released, any files. Ask them if they've ever been briefed. Put them on the spot, because when you did with Dick Cheney, I think should go out and to everybody. Anyhow, we are running down to a little under about 4 minutes of the show, so I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to essentially make a closing statement. So let's go ahead and start with Betty, and then we'll go to Bob and see if Grant wants to throw something in.
Okay, well, I just would like to say that around you, within you, is the one, and you just have to open up and realize what is right, what is good, and go that direction. And I think that you will see that life will become better. And
I think if we all follow that mantra, you're absolutely right that we will. And the coming of your new book explaining the one, I think, is going to do a lot. And that may be your mission.
I hope so. I really hope so, because our world really needs it. We're coming to a certain point that is extremely dangerous.
I agree, and it's been extremely dangerous. And I think the clock to midnight, the Armageddon clock, has actually been moved to 3 minutes to midnight now, which is worse. Which really the kettle is boiling and the lid is shaking. That's how bad things are right now.
Yes.
Anyhow, Bob.
Betty was told the simplest thing in the world. They told her this very simply: love is the answer.
Yes, exactly.
People need to stop what they're doing, start taking care of each other and the planet, and we won't have the problems that we have today. It's so simple, and yet it seems so hard for people to get through their heads.
Exactly.
I agree. I definitely agree. And I think we're finally getting to that point. There's been more awareness made since ever in the history of ufology. The ridicule factor is still there, specifically in these Western countries. You're not going to counter this kind of resistance. South, it's Mexico, it's nowhere near as bad in any of the Latin American countries or countries like India. They embrace this, yet the Western countries really, we destroy it.
Yeah.
Again, it boils down to dollars, and that's a problem in the U.S., dollars and the technology.
Yes. And here, actually, a great friend and co-host of my other show, same by the same name, Researchers on a Mission, Johnny Webb from the UK, just wrote Service to Others with Unconditional Love. And I think that is exactly what
That's why I love our dog so much.
Yes.
They give unconditional love. They're there for you, and they're so sweet.
Well, it's been such an honor to interview both of you. And again, I want to plug in your website, the Andreassonaffair.com, ANDREASSON affair.com. And there's, again, photos, documents, so much the amazing stuff there. And we will absolutely have to do this again. Right before we end the show, Grant, in under a minute or so, if you want to make any last-minute comments on what we've just done in the last 2 hours?
Well, I just say God bless Betty and Bob. I mean, you stated that you had gotten sort of a message or a mission to bring a message to the world, and it may not have gotten through to anybody, but it did get through to me. I've watched your case for a long time. You have the two messages, the oneness and the message of love, which comes through near-death experiences. It comes through experiencers. It comes all the time. And so I can hardly wait for your book to come out. I mean, I know you haven't got it sold yet, but I think the world needs it. And I think you've done a great mission to the world. And I firmly appreciate what you've done. So
thank you. But Grant, I think you have a great mission for the world, too. God bless you. And you, Dr. J, as well.
Thank you so much. God bless you all. God bless all of us. And just Amen. As Paul Hellyer puts it, God bless the children of God, the children of the earth.
Exactly.
That's what we need. We really need.
And we all are the children of God.
Yes, I agree. Again, it's been such a fascinating interview. I hope everyone out there has enjoyed it. This will be up on YouTube, and it's been an amazing time to have Grant join in, especially with his interest with this case. With that being said, make sure you check out the website, drjradiolive.com. These videos are being uploaded. There are several right now. Join us Thursday for Stanton Friedman, and of course, Jim Martz next week, and so much more. This is Dr. J, Rome Radio, signing out.